It starts the same way every day. You are fine in the morning, moving reasonably well, feeling like yourself, going about the business of the day. Then afternoon arrives, and with it, that feeling. The heaviness in the lower legs. The sense that your feet have become slightly heavier than they were at breakfast. The awareness by 4 or 5 in the evening that walking has become something you are doing carefully rather than naturally. You have explained it many ways over the months. The heat, the amount of walking you did earlier, getting older, not drinking enough water, sitting too long, standing too long. You have bought different shoes. You have tried elevating your legs in the evening. You have reduced salt. You have done everything that seemed reasonable, and the heaviness keeps returning reliably every single afternoon like a tide that comes in on schedule and does not fully go out until morning. What I am about to tell you is that for millions of seniors on Amlodipine, that afternoon heaviness has a name, a mechanism, a medical explanation, and a conversation that should have happened the day the prescription was written, but almost never did. I'm Dr. Eleanor Bennett. Subscribe to this channel before we go further, because this video is for every senior who has been silently managing a symptom they assumed was the price of aging, when it was actually the price of a medication effect that nobody took the time to fully explain. Let me start with Eleanor. Not because her story is dramatic, because it is so ordinary that I have heard versions of it from more patients than I can count, and that ordinariness is exactly why it needs to be told. Eleanor was 73, retired, active in her garden and her community. She had been on amlodipine for 3 years when the heaviness began. Not swelling, at first just weight, a sense that her legs were carrying more than they used to by the time afternoon arrived. She mentioned it once to her daughter, who suggested compression socks. She tried them. They helped a little. She mentioned it once to her pharmacist, who suggested hydration. She drank more water. It helped a little. She never mentioned it to her prescribing doctor, because by the time her appointments came around, she had managed the symptom well enough that it did not feel worth bringing up. She did not want to seem like she was complaining about something minor when there were presumably more serious things to discuss. 3 years later, Eleanor had reorganized her life around that afternoon heaviness without ever consciously deciding to. She no longer visited friends in the late afternoon because the drive home felt like too much. She had stopped attending the evening garden club because standing for an hour left her legs feeling punished. She had given up her Thursday afternoon volunteer shift because the walk from the parking lot had become genuinely difficult by the time she got back to her car. Nobody had prescribed any of those losses. They had accumulated quietly, one small withdrawal at a time, because a medication effect that was never properly explained had never been properly addressed. Here's what is actually happening inside the legs of a senior on amlodipine every afternoon. And I want you to understand this clearly, because understanding the mechanism is what transforms the symptom from something you endure to something you report and demand a solution for. Amlodipine works by blocking calcium channels in the smooth muscle cells of artery walls. When those cells cannot receive the calcium signal that tells them to contract, they relax. The arteries widen, blood pressure falls. This is the intended effect, and in the arteries of the heart, the brain, and the systemic circulation, it is genuinely beneficial. But the arteries are not the only blood vessels in the lower legs. The venous system, the network of veins that carries blood back up from the feet and ankles to the heart, is also affected. And here's where the imbalance that creates afternoon heaviness lives. Amlodipine relaxes arterial smooth muscle more effectively than it relaxes venous smooth muscle. Blood flows down into the lower legs through the relaxed arteries more easily than normal. But the veins, which depend on their own tone and on the pumping action of the leg muscles to move blood upward against gravity, do not receive the same degree of relaxation signal. The result is a pressure gradient, more blood arriving in the lower legs than is efficiently leaving them. pressure builds in the small vessels and capillaries of the ankle and lower leg tissue. Fluid plasma, the liquid component of blood, leaks out of those pressurized vessels into the surrounding tissue space. The tissue fills, the legs feel heavy, the ankles look puffy by evening, and by the time morning arrives, and the person has been horizontal for 8 hours, allowing gravity to assist fluid redistribution, the swelling drains, the legs feel normal again, and the cycle repeats. This process is called gravity-dependent edema, and it is one of the most common and most consistently under-addressed side effects of calcium channel blockers in seniors. The fact that it follows a daily rhythm, better in the morning, worse in the afternoon, is not coincidence. It is physics. Gravity acting on a circulatory system that has been pharmacologically altered to move blood in one direction more efficiently than the other. Now here's the part that most seniors never hear, and it is the part that matters most. But before I get there, let me add one layer to the mechanism that almost nobody ever explains, because it is the layer that connects the visible symptom to the invisible damage. The lymphatic system is a parallel circulation that runs alongside the blood vessels throughout the body. Its job is to collect the fluid that leaks out of blood vessels into the tissue space and return it to the bloodstream. Think of it as the drainage system for everything the circulatory system leaves behind. In healthy tissue and an adequately active person, the lymphatic system handles this task quietly and efficiently. Most people never know it exists because it works without prompting. In a senior on amlodipine, the daily afternoon pooling of fluid in the lower legs presents the lymphatic system with a volume of work it was not designed to sustain long term. The lymphatic vessels in the lower legs are under-muscled structures that depend on movement, walking, calf contractions, leg muscle activity to push fluid upward. In a senior who has, over months and years, reduced their walking because of the very heaviness that the lymphatic system is struggling with, that movement is decreasing at exactly the moment the lymphatic demand is increasing. This creates a cycle that worsens slowly and invisibly. Less movement means less lymphatic pumping. Less lymphatic pumping means more fluid accumulation. More fluid accumulation means heavier legs. Heavier legs means less movement. And with each turn of that cycle, the lymphatic vessels themselves, exposed to chronic pressure, can begin to lose efficiency in ways that become increasingly difficult to reverse. Margaret was 75 and had been on amlodipine for 5 years. Her afternoon heaviness had never been dramatic, never the kind of pitting edema that alarmed anyone. Just a consistent low-grade fullness in the lower legs that made the afternoon hour feel heavier than the morning. She had addressed it with compression stockings and by spending her afternoons in a recliner rather than the garden chair she preferred. What she had not addressed was the lymphatic stress accumulating underneath that visible symptom. When she developed a swollen lymph node above one knee, a response to the chronic low-grade inflammation in tissue that had been edematous for 5 years, the conversation finally happened that should have happened in year 1. Now, here's the part that most seniors never hear, and it is the part that matters most. The heaviness and the visible swelling are not the problem themselves. They are the signal, and what they are signaling is a chronic low-grade circulatory stress in the lower extremities that has real, measurable, accumulating consequences not just for comfort and mobility, but for the health of the tissues, the lymphatic system, and ultimately for the cardiovascular system that amlodipine was prescribed to protect. Let me tell you what chronic venous congestion does to tissue over time. The fluid that leaks into the tissue space around the ankles and lower legs is not neutral. It contains proteins, inflammatory molecules, and cellular waste products that the lymphatic system is responsible for clearing. When that fluid accumulates faster than the lymphatic system can remove it, which is exactly what happens in persistent amlodipine-related edema, The tissue environment becomes chronically inflamed. The skin thickens and hardens in a process called lipodermatosclerosis. The risk of skin breakdown increases dramatically. Small cuts or abrasions that would heal quickly in healthy tissue take much longer to resolve, and the risk of serious skin infection cellulitis rises significantly in tissue that is chronically congested and under stress. In a senior whose skin is already less resilient, whose immune response is already less robust, and whose wound healing is already slower than it was decades ago, this tissue environment is not a minor inconvenience. It is a genuine health risk that worsens with every month the underlying cause goes unaddressed. Walter was 78 and had been managing his afternoon leg heaviness with compression stockings for 2 years, when a small blister on his left ankle from a new shoe, an ordinary blister, did not heal in the expected week or two. It became infected. The infection spread in tissue that was chronically edematous and poorly perfused. Walter spent 9 days in the hospital. He recovered. But the 2 weeks preceding that hospitalization, during which the wound had not healed and he had assumed it simply needed more time, were 2 weeks in which a skin infection was progressing through tissue that had been compromised by years of unaddressed circulatory congestion. The compression stockings had been managing the symptom. Nobody had been addressing the cause. Now let me tell you about the most dangerous thing that happens. Not to the tissue, not to the skin, but to the person living inside the body experiencing this symptom every afternoon. The adaptation. When a symptom is present every day for months, the human mind does something remarkable and ultimately harmful. It stops registering it as a problem and starts registering it as the new normal. The afternoon heaviness that was alarming in month 2 becomes unremarkable by month 8. The activities that were difficult become activities that are simply not done. The conversations with the doctor that would have happened in year 1 do not happen in year 3 because the symptom no longer feels new enough, urgent enough, or remarkable enough to report. This adaptive silence is where the real long-term damage accumulates. Not in the swelling itself, but in the life that contracts around it. Seniors on amlodipine who develop significant afternoon leg heaviness walk less. The research on this is consistent and unsurprising. When walking becomes uncomfortable and effortful, people walk less. But what the research also shows is the cascade of consequences that follows. Less walking means reduced cardiovascular fitness. Reduced cardiovascular fitness means the heart works harder at rest. More sedentary time means higher inflammatory markers. Higher inflammation means greater cardiovascular risk. More time sitting means reduced muscle mass in the very calf muscles that would help pump venous blood upward and reduce the edema. And reduced calf muscle mass means the afternoon heaviness gets worse. A medication prescribed to protect the heart can, through an unaddressed side effect, contribute over months and years to deconditioning and sedentary behavior that meaningfully increases the very cardiovascular risk it was prescribed to reduce. This is entirely preventable if the side effect is named, addressed, and managed, rather than silently absorbed into a diminished routine. Dennis was 70, on amlodipine for 4 years, and had been an avid walker 3 miles every morning. By year 2, afternoon heaviness had made his mornings more cautious and his afternoons sedentary. By year 4, his walks had shortened to 1 mile and his cardiologist was considering adding a second medication. Nobody had connected the fitness decline to the leg heaviness. Nobody had connected the leg heaviness to the dose. Dennis, who had never been a complainer, had said nothing because it had stopped feeling like something to say. Now let me tell you about the heart. Because the heaviness in the legs is not only damaging the legs, it is adding work to the very organ that amlodipine was prescribed to protect. The heart is a pump. Its job is to push blood forward through the arterial system and to receive it back through the venous system. For that return circulation to work efficiently, the veins need adequate tone. The leg muscles need to help pump blood upward. and there needs to be no persistent pooling of blood in the lower extremities that reduces what returns to the heart. When blood pools in the lower legs, as it does every afternoon in many seniors on amlodipine, the volume of blood returning to the heart is slightly reduced. In response, the heart may need to work slightly harder to maintain adequate cardiac output. This is not a dramatic demand. It is a subtle, chronic, daily demand that places a low-grade extra burden on a heart that is already managing the natural workload of aging. Over months and years, that chronic mild overload is not trivial. It contributes to the kind of cardiac remodeling that makes the heart less efficient over time, the same kind of inefficiency that amlodipine was prescribed to prevent by lowering the pressure the heart pumps against. In other words, and I want to say this plainly, the unaddressed leg swelling caused by amlodipine can place a type of strain on the heart that partially offsets the cardiovascular protection the medication was designed to provide. The medication is protecting the heart from one kind of stress, while the unaddressed side effect is contributing to another kind. And the net benefit of the medication is smaller than it would be if the side effect were properly managed. This is why the leg heaviness is not a cosmetic complaint. It is a clinical issue that belongs in your medical conversation, not in your shopping cart next to the compression socks. Let me tell you what the options actually are. Because this is the information Eleanor deserved 3 years before her life quietly shrank around a symptom that had multiple potential solutions. The first option is a frank conversation about dose. Amlodipine-related edema is dose-dependent. At 5 milligrams, many patients experience minimal heaviness. At 10 milligrams, the incidence increases significantly. If you are on a higher dose, a careful evaluation of whether that dose is truly necessary, whether a lower dose combined with a second medication might achieve the same control with less edema, is entirely warranted. The second option is a medication class review. ARBs, ACE inhibitors, and other medication classes do not produce the same gravity-dependent edema. For a senior whose quality of life is meaningfully affected, a class change is worth discussing. The third option is combination therapy that targets the edema mechanism specifically. Adding a low-dose ACE inhibitor, or ARB, to amlodipine has been shown to reduce amlodipine-induced edema, not by treating swelling directly, but by altering the venous pressure dynamics that create the imbalance. This is a pharmacologically specific solution that most patients are never told exists. The fourth option is structured afternoon movement. Deliberate calf raises, ankle circles, and brief walking intervals during the window when edema accumulates can significantly reduce fluid buildup. The calf muscles, when actively contracted, function as a venous pump. This is not a cure, but as part of a broader approach, it is a tool that matters. What none of these options look like is silent acceptance. That is the approach Eleanor had adopted, the approach most seniors adopt. And it is the approach that quietly costs the most. In tissue health, in cardiac workload, in mobility, in independence, and in the ordinary daily freedom to walk to the car, attend an evening garden club, or complete a volunteer shift without planning around a symptom that medicine has multiple responses to. Let me bring you back to Eleanor, because her story has a second chapter that the first chapter did not seem to promise. When she finally described the full picture, the 3 years of afternoon heaviness, the compression socks, the activities quietly abandoned, the shoes bought for accommodation rather than preference, her doctor listened in a way that her passing managed mentions had never quite prompted before. A medication review happened. A dose adjustment was made, a combination strategy was discussed, and over the following 6 weeks, the heaviness that had been as reliable as the afternoon itself became something Eleanor noticed less, managed less, planned around less. She went back to the Thursday volunteer shift. She attended the garden club. She drove to her friend's house in the late afternoon and drove home without dreading the walk from the parking lot. She told me something that I think about often. She said, I had completely stopped expecting that to change. I thought that was just my life now. It was not her life. It was a medication effect. And medication effects, when properly identified and properly addressed, do not have to be someone's life. Your afternoon heaviness has a name. It has a mechanism. It has options. And the only thing standing between you and those options is the conversation you have not yet had. Have it. At your next appointment, describe the heaviness. Describe when it starts and when it eases. Describe what you have stopped doing because of it. That description is not a complaint. It is a clinical history, and it belongs in the room. Share this video with someone who has been quietly living around heavy legs for longer than they should have. Subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in the next video.